Now, today we will talk about some important methods in psychology in chapter 2, methods of inquiry in psychology. So, in the previous section, we have read and discussed about the variety and various variety of data that we collect in psychological studies. So, all these varieties of data cannot be collected through a single method of inquiry. Psychologists use a variety of methods like observation, experimental, correlational, survey, psychological testing, and case study to collect the data. The aim of this all the information is to guide you all to select the methods which may be appropriate for different research purposes. Like, for example, you can observe the behavior of spectators watching a football match. You can conduct an experiment to see if children taking an examination do better in the classroom in which they had studied the subject or in the examination hall cause effect relationship. Or you can correlate intelligence with, say, self esteem for prediction purposes. You can survey students' attitude towards privatization of education. You can use psychological tests to find out individual differences. You can conduct a case study on the development of language in a child. The main characteristics of these methods are as first the observation method. So, this method of observation is a very powerful tool of psychological inquiry. It is an effective method of describing behavior. In our daily life, we remain busy with observing numerous things throughout the day. Many times, we do not take notice of what we are seeing or what we have seen. We see, but we do not observe. We remain aware of only a few things that we see daily. But have you experienced such a thing? You may also have experienced that if you carefully observe a person or event for some time, you come to know many interesting things about the person or the event. A systematic observation differs from day to day observation in many respects, and these are as first selection. So, psychologists do not observe all the behavior that they encounter, but rather they select a particular behavior for observation. For example, you may be interested to know how children studying in class 11 spend their time in school. Two things are possible at this stage. As a researcher, you might think that you have a fairly good idea about what happens in school. You might prepare a list of activities and go to the school with a view to finding out their occurrences. Alternatively, you might think that you do not know what happens in the school, and by your observation, you would like to discover it in this. And second, under observation method is recording. So there is another method through researcher records the selected behavior using different means such as marking tallies for the already identified behavior whenever they occur, taking notes, describing each activity in greater detail using shorthand or symbols, photographs, video recording, etc. C under observation method is analysis of data. After the observations have been made, psychologists analyze whatever they have recorded with a view to derive some meaning out of it. So it is important to know what making good observations is a skill. A good observer knows what he is looking for, whom he wants to observe, when and where the observation needs to be made, in what form the observation will be recorded, and what methods will be used to analyze the observed behavior. Now we come to the types of observation. The first type of observation is naturalistic versus controlled observation. When observations are done in a natural or real life settings, so like in the school setting in which observation was done in the previous example which we have discussed for class 11th, it is called naturalistic observation. So in this case, the observer makes no effort to control or manipulate the situation for making an observation. This type of observation is conducted in hospitals, homes, schools, daycare centers, etc. However, many a times you might need to control certain factors that determine behavior as they are not the focus of your study. For this reason, many of the studies in psychology are conducted in the laboratory. Like, for example, about the smoke that was introduced in a room in a controlled laboratory situation. This was a situation which was created, which is not real life situation. It was created and is performed in the controlled laboratory. This type of observation called controlled laboratory observation, and it is actually obtained in laboratory experiments. B yani second type of observation is non-participant versus participant observation. So observation can be done in participant or non-participant observation. These are the two ways. One, you may decide to observe the person or event from a distance, and the second way is the observer may become part of the group being observed. You yourself become the part of the group. In the first case, the person being observed may not be aware that he is being observed. For example, you want to observe the pattern of interaction between teachers and students in a particular class. There are many ways of achieving this goal. You can install a video camera to record the classroom activities, which you can see later and analyze. Alternatively, you may decide to sit in a corner of the class without interfering or participating in their everyday activities. So, this type of observation is called non participant observation. The danger in this type of setup is that the very fact that someone, that is the outsider, is sitting and observing may bring a change in the behavior of students and the teacher if the person gets to know about this. So, in participant observation, the observer becomes a part of the school or the group of people being observed. So, in participant observation, the observer takes some time to establish a rapport with the group so that they start accepting him as one of the group members. However, the degree of involvement of the observer with the group being observed would vary depending upon the focus of the study. The advantage of the observation method is that it enables a researcher to study people and their behavior in a naturalistic situation as it occurs. However, the observation method is labor intensive, time consuming, and is susceptible to the observer's bias. Our observation is influenced by our values and beliefs about the person or the event. So, as we all are familiar with this saying that we see things as we are and not as things are. We see things as we are and not as the things are. Because of our biases, we may interpret things in a different way than what the participants may actually mean. Therefore, the observer should record the behavior as it happens and should not interpret the behavior at the time of observation itself. Next type of observation method is experimental method. So next method is experimental method. So experiments are generally conducted to establish cause effect relationship between two sets of events or variables in a controlled setting. It is a carefully regulated procedure in which changes are made in one factor and is of and its effect is studied on another factor. While keeping other related factors constant in the experiment, cause is the event being changed or manipulated. Effect is the behavior that changes because of the manipulation. Now, the concept of variable. So as we have read earlier that the in the experimental method that the researcher attempts to establish causal of relationship between two variables. So what is a variable? Any stimulus or event which varies, that is it takes on different values or changes and can be measured, is a variable. An object by itself is not a variable, but its attributes are. For example, the pen that you use for writing is not a variable, but there are varieties of pens available in different shapes, sizes, and color. All of these are variables. The room in which we are sitting is not a variable, but its size is, as there are rooms of different sizes. The height of the individuals, 5 or 5 to 6, is another variable. Similarly, people of different races have different colors. Young people have started dyeing their hair in different colors. Thus, color of hair becomes a variable because it can be changed. So, intelligence is a variable. There are people with varying levels of intelligence, high, moderate, low. The presence or absence of persons in the room is a variable as shown in the experiment. Thus, the variation can be in the quality or quantity of objects, events. Variables are of many types. We will however, focus on independent and dependent variables. Independent variable is that variable which is manipulated or altered or its strength varied by the researcher in the experiment. It is the effect of this change in the variable which the researcher wants to observe or note in the study. In the experiment conducted by Latane and Darley, the researcher wanted to know and examine the effect of the presence of other persons on reporting of the smoke which was spread in the room. The independent variable was presence or absence of other persons in the room. The variables on which the effect of independent variable is observed is called dependent variable. Dependent variable represents the phenomenon the researcher desires to explain. It is expected that change in the dependent variable will ensue from changes in the independent variable. The frequency of reporting of smoke in the above case of this experiment was a dependent variable. Thus, the independent variable is the cause and dependent variable the effect in any experimental situation. One must remember that independent and dependent variables are interdependent. Neither of them can be defined without the other. Also, independent variable chosen by the researcher is not the only variable that influences the dependent variable. Any behavioral event contains many variables. It also takes place within a context. Independent and dependent variables are chosen because of the researcher's theoretical interest. However, there are many other relevant or extraneous variables that influence the dependent variable, but the researcher may not be interested in examining their effects. These extraneous variables need to be controlled in an experiment so that a researcher is able to pinpoint the cause and effect relationship between independent and dependent variables. Experimental and control groups. We will discuss about experimental and control groups. Experiments generally involve one or more experimental groups and one or more control groups. An experimental group is a group in which members of the group are exposed to independent variable manipulation. The control group is a comparison group that is treated in every way like the experimental group except that the manipulated variable is absent in it. For example, in the study by Latane and Darley, there were two experimental groups and one control group. So, as we have noted, the participants in the study were sent to three types of rooms. In one room, no one was present, control group. In the other two rooms, two persons were already seated. Experimental groups of the two experimental groups, one group was instructed not to do anything when smoke filled in the room. The other group was not given any instructions. After the experimental manipulation had occurred, the performance of the control group measured in terms of reporting of smoke was compared with that of the experimental group. It was found that the control group participants reported in maximum numbers about the emergency, followed by the first experimental group members where the participants were not given any instructions, and the second experimental group consisting of Confederates reported the emergency situation the least. It should be noted that in an experiment, except for the experimental manipulation, other conditions are kept constant for both experimental and control group. One attempts to control all those relevant variables which can influence the dependent variable. For example, the speed with which smoke started entering the rooms, the total amount of smoke in the rooms, physical and other conditions of the rooms were similar in case of all the three groups. The distribution of participants to experimental and control groups was done randomly, a method that ensures that each person has an equal chance of being included in any of the groups. If in one group the experimenter had included only males and in the other group females, the results obtained in the study could be due to the differences in gender rather than due to experimental manipulation. All relevant variables in experimental studies that might influence the dependent variable need to be controlled. These are of three major types: organismic variables such as anxiety, intelligence, personality, etc., situational or environmental variables operating at the time of conducting the experiment, such as noise, temperature, humidity, and sequential variables. The sequence related variables assume significance when the participants in experiments are required to be tested in several conditions. Exposure to many conditions may result in experimental fatigue or practice effects, which may influence the results of the study and make the interpretation of the findings difficult. In order to control relevant variables, experimenters use several control techniques. Some illustrations are given below. Since the goal of an experiment is to minimize extraneous variables, the best way to handle this problem is to eliminate them from the experimental setting. For example, the experiment may be conducted in a soundproof and air conditioned room to eliminate the effect of noise and temperature. Second, elimination is not always possible. In such cases, efforts should be made to hold them constant so that their effect remains the same throughout the experiment. Third, for controlling organismic, for example, fear, motivation, and background variables such as rural, urban, caste, socioeconomic status, matching is also used. In this procedure, the relevant variables in the two groups are equated or are held constant by taking matched pairs across conditions of the experiment. Counterbalancing technique is used to minimize the sequence effect. Suppose there are two tasks to be given in an experiment. Rather than giving the two tasks in the same sequence, the experimenter may interchange the order of the tasks. Thus, half of the group may receive the tasks in the order of A and B, while the other half in order of B and A, or the same individual may be given the tasks in A order. Random assignment of participants to different groups eliminates any potential systematic differences between groups. The strength of a well designed experiment is that it can provide, relatively speaking, a convincing evidence of a cause effect relationship between two or more variables. However, experiments are often conducted in a highly controlled laboratory situation. In this sense, they only simulate situations that exist in the outside world. They are frequently criticized for this reason. The experiments may produce results that do not generalize well or apply to real situations. In other words, they have low external validity. Another limitation of the laboratory experiment is that it is not always feasible to study a particular problem experimentally. For example, an experiment to study the effect of nutritional deficiency on intelligence level of children cannot be conducted, as it would be ethically wrong to starve anyone. The third problem is that it is difficult to know and control all the relevant variables. Field experiments and quasi experiments. So now we will discuss about this field experiment and quasi experiments. Now if the researcher wants to have high generalizability or to conduct studies which are not possible in laboratory settings, he may go to the field or the natural setting where the particular phenomenon actually exists. In other words, he may conduct a field experiment. For example, a researcher may want to know which method would lead to better learning among students, lecture or demonstration method. For this, a researcher may prefer to conduct an experiment in the school. The researcher may select two groups of participants, each teach one group by demonstration method and another group by the normal teaching method for some time. He may compare their performance at the end of the learning session. In such types of experiments, the control over relevant variables is less than what we find in laboratory settings and experiments. Also, it is more time consuming and expensive. Many variables cannot be manipulated in the laboratory settings. For example, if we want to study the effect of an earthquake on children who lost their parents, we cannot create this condition artificially in the laboratory. So in such situations, the researcher adopts a method of quasi, the Latin word meaning as if experimentation. In such types of experiments, the independent variable is selected rather than varied or manipulated by the experimenter. For example, in the experimental group, we can have children who lost their parents in the earthquake, and in the control group, children who experienced the earthquake but did not lose their parents. Thus, a quasi experiment attempts to manipulate an independent variable in a natural setting using naturally occurring groups to form experimental and control groups. Next, we are going to discuss about correlational research. So, many times we wish to determine the relationship between two variables for prediction purposes. For example, we may be interested in knowing whether the amount of study time is related to the student's academic achievement. This question is different from the one which experimental method seeks to answer, in the sense that here you do not manipulate the amount of study time and examine its impact on achievement. Rather, we simply find out the relationship between the two variables to determine whether they are associated or covariant or not. The strength and direction of the relationship between the two variables is represented by a number known as correlation coefficient. Its value can range from plus 1.0 through 0.02 minus 1.0. As we have As we can see, the coefficient of correlation is of three types: positive, negative, and zero. A positive correlation indicates that as the value of one variable x increases, the value of the other variable y will also increase. Similarly, when variable x decreases, a decrease in y2 takes place. Suppose it is found that more time the students spent on studying, the higher was their achievement score. Also, the less they studied, the lower was their achievement score. This type of association will be indicated by a positive number, and the stronger the association between studying and achievement, the closer the number would be to plus 1.0. We may find a correlation of plus 0.85, indicating a strong positive association between study time and achievement. On the other hand, a negative correlation tells us that as the value of one variable x increases, the value of the other y variable decreases. For example, we may hypothesize that as the hours of study time increases, the number of hours spent in other activities will decrease. Here we are expecting a negative correlation ranging between 0 and minus 1.0. It is also possible that sometimes no correlation may exist between the two variables. This is called zero correlation. Generally, it is difficult to find zero correlation, but the correlations found may be close to zero. For example, minus zero point zero 0.02 or plus zero point zero 0.03. This indicates that no significant relationship exists between two variables or the two variables are unrelated. Now we will discuss about survey research. We may have read or seen in the television that during election surveys are conducted to find out if people would vote for a particular political party or favor a particular candidate. Survey research came into existence to study opinions, attitudes, and social facts. Their main concern initially was to find out the existing reality or baseline, so they were used to find out facts such as the literacy rate at a particular time, religious affiliations, income level of a particular group of people, etc. They were also used to find out the attitude of people towards family planning, the attitude towards giving powers to the Panchayati Raj institutions for running programs related to health, education, sanitation, etc. However, they have now evolved into a sophisticated technique which helps in inferring various kinds of causal relationships. The survey research uses different techniques for collecting information. Included among these techniques are personal interviews, questionnaires, telephonic surveys, and control observations. These techniques are discussed will be discussed now. First, personal interviews. The interview method is one of the most frequently used methods for obtaining information from people. It is used in diverse kinds of situations. It is used by a doctor to obtain information from the patient, an employer when meeting a prospective employee, a salesperson interviewing a housewife to know why she uses a certain brand of soap. On television, we often see media persons interviewing people on issues of national and international importance. What happens in an interview? So, we see that two or more persons sit face to face with each other, in which one person, generally called interviewer, asks the questions and the other person, called interviewee or respondent, answers the questions related to a problem. An interview is a purposeful activity conducted to derive factual information, opinions, and attitudes and reasons for particular behavior, etc., from the respondents. It is generally conducted face to face, but sometimes it can also take place over the phone. There can be two broad types of interviews: structured or standardized. and unstructured or non-standardized. So this distinction is based upon the type of preparation we make before conducting the interview, as we have to ask questions during the interview. It is required that we prepare a list of questions beforehand. The list is called an interview schedule. A structured interview is where is one where the questions in the schedule are written clearly in a particular sequence. The interviewer has little or no liberty to make changes in the wordings of the questions or the order in which they are to be asked. The responses to these questions are also in some cases specified in advance. These are called close-ended questions. So in contrast, in an unstructured interview, the interviewer has the flexibility to take decisions about the questions to be asked, the wordings of the questions, and the sequence in which questions are to be asked. Since responses are not specified in such types of interviews, the respondent can answer the questions in the way he chooses to. Such questions are called open ended questions. For example, if the researcher wants to know about the happiness level of a person, he may ask, "How happy are you?" The respondent may reply to this question the way he chooses to answer. An interview may have the following combinations of participants in an interview situation. First, individual to individual. So, it is a situation where one interviewer interviews another person. Second, individual to group. In this situation, one interviewer interviews a group of persons. One variant of it is called a focus group discussion. C. Group to individuals. It is a situation where one group of interviewers interview one person. You may experience this type of situation when you appear for a job interview. Fourth, group to group. It is a situation where one group of interviewers interview another group of interviewees. So, interviewing is a skill which requires proper training. A good interviewer knows how to make the respondent at ease and get the optimal answer. He may remains sensitive to the way a person responds and, if needed, probes for more information. If the respondent gives vague answers, the interviewer may try to get specific and concrete answers. The interview method helps in obtaining in depth information. It is flexible and adaptable to individual situations and can often be used when no other method is possible or adequate. It can be used even with children and non literate persons. An interviewer can know whether the respondent understands the questions and can repeat or paraphrase questions. However, interviews require time. Often getting information from one person may take an hour or more, which may not be cost effective. Now we will discuss about questionnaire survey. The questionnaire is the most common, simple, versatile and low cost self-report method of collecting information. It consists of a predetermined set of questions. The respondent has to read the questions and mark the answers on paper rather than respond verbally to the interviewer. They are in some ways like highly structured interviews. Questionnaires can be distributed to a group of persons at a time who write down their answers to the questions and return to the researcher, or can be sent through mail. Generally, two types of questions are used in the questionnaire: open ended and close ended questions. With open ended questions, the respondent is free to write whatever answer he considers appropriate. In the closed ended type, the questions and their probable answers are given, and the respondent is required to select the correct answer. Examples of closed-ended questions require responses like yes, no, true, false, multiple choice, or using a rating scale. In case of rating scale, a statement is given and the respondent is asked to give her his views on a 3 point, that is agree, undecided, disagree, or 5 point strongly agree, agree, undecided, disagree, strongly disagree, or 7 point, 9 point, 11 point, or 13 point scale. So, in some cases, the participants are asked to rank a number of things in a preferential order. The questionnaire is used for collecting background and demographic information, information about past behavior, attitudes and opinions, knowledge about a particular topic, and expectations and aspirations of the persons. Sometimes the survey is conducted by sending the questionnaire by mail. The main problem of a mailed questionnaire is poor response from the respondents. Now, next we will come for telephone surveys. Surveys are also conducted through telephone. Surveys are also conducted through telephone, and nowadays you must have seen programs asking you to send your views through mobile phones, SMS. The telephone survey helps in reducing time. However, since the respondents do not know the interviewer, the technique is fraught with uncooperativeness, reluctance, and superficial answers by the respondents. There is also a possibility that those responding may differ from those not responding, for example, on age, gender, income levels, education levels, etc. Besides their psychological characteristics. This will lead to very biased kinds of results. The method of observation have been discussed now. So this method is also used for conducting surveys. Each method has its own advantages and limitations. The researcher needs to exercise caution in selecting a particular method. The survey method has several advantages. First, information can be gathered quickly and efficiently from thousands of persons. Second, since surveys can be conducted quickly, public opinions on new issues can be obtained almost as soon as the issues arise. There are some limitations of a survey too. First, people may give inaccurate information because of memory lapses, or they may not want to let the researcher know what they really believe about a particular issue. Second, people sometimes offer responses they think the researcher wants to hear. Now we will discuss about psychological testing. So, assessment of individual differences has remained one of the important concerns of psychology from the very beginning. Psychologists have constructed different types of tests for assessment of various human characteristics such as intelligence, aptitude, personality, interest, attitudes, values, educational achievements, etc. These tests are used for various purposes such as personal selection, placement, training, guidance, diagnosis, etc., in multiple contexts, including educational institutions, guidance clinics, industries, defense establishments, and so forth. So, if we see about the psychological test, so it contains a number of questions called items with their probable responses which are related to a particular human characteristic or attribute. It is important here that the characteristic for which a test has been developed should be defined clearly and unambiguously, and all items questioned should be related to that characteristic only. We will notice in this also that a test is meant the test is meant for a particular age group. It may or may not have a fixed time limit for entering the for answering the questions. So Broadly speaking, a psychological test is a standardized and objective instrument which is used to assess an individual's standing in relation to others on some mental or behavioral characteristics. So, two things are worth noting in this psychological test definition, that objectivity refers to the fact that if two or more researchers administer a psychological test on the same group of people, both of them would come up with more or less the same values for each person in the group. In order for a psychological test to become an objective measure, it is essential that items should be worded in such a manner that they communicate the same meaning to different readers. Also, the instructions to the test takers about how to answer the test items should be specified in advance. The procedure of administering the test, such as environmental conditions, time limit, mode of administration, individual or group, should be spelled, and the procedure for scoring of the participants' responses need to be described. The construction of a test is a systematic process and involves certain steps. It involves detailed analysis of items and estimating reliability, validity, and norms of the whole test. So, reliability. Reliability of the test refers to the consistency of scores obtained by an individual on the same test on two different occasions. For example, we administer the test to a group of students today and re-administer it on the same set of students after some time. Let us say, for example, 20 days. If the test is reliable, there should not be any variation in the scores obtained by the students on the two occasions. For this, we can compute test reliability, which indicates the temporal stability or stability of the test scores over time. It is computed by finding out coefficient of correlation between the two sets of scores on the same set of persons. Another kind of test reliability is called split half reliability. It gives an indication about the degree of internal consistency of the test. This is based on the assumption that items of a test, if they are from the same domain, should correlate with each other. If they are from different domains, for example, apples and oranges, then they would not. For finding out internal consistency, the test is divided into two equal halves employing odd even method. Items 1, 3, 5 in one group and items 2, 4, 6 in another group, and correlation is computed between the scores of odd and even items. For a test to be usable, it should also be valid. Validity refers to the question, does the test measure what it claims to measure? For example, if you have constructed a test of mathematics achievement, whether the test is measuring mathematical achievement or, for example, language proficiency. Finally, a test becomes a standardized test when norms are developed for the test. As mentioned before, that norm is the normal or average performance of the group. The test is administered on a large number of students. Their average performance standards are set based on their age, sex, place of residence, etc. This helps us in comparing the performance of an individual student with others of the same group. It also helps in interpreting individuals' score obtained on a test. Now comes the types of tests. So, psychological tests are classified on the basis of their language, mode of administration, and difficulty level. Depending upon the language, we have verbal, non-verbal, and performance tests. Literacy is required for taking verbal tests as the items have to be written in some language. In non-verbal tests, items are made of symbols or pictures. Performance tests require movement of objects from their respective places in a particular order. Depending upon the mode of administration, psychological tests are divided into individual or group tests. An individual test is administered by the researcher to one person at a time, while group tests can be administered to a large number of persons at the same time. In individual tests, the researcher administers the test face to face and remains seated before the test taker and notes down the responses. In the group test, the instructions about answering the items, etc., are written on the test, which the test taker reads and answers the questions accordingly. The test administrator explains the instructions to the entire group. Individual tests are time consuming but are important ways of getting responses from children and from those who do not know the language. Group tests are easy to administer and are also less time consuming. However, the responses are fraught with certain limitations. The respondent may not be motivated enough to answer the questions and may give fake responses. Psychological tests are also classified into speed and power tests. In a speed test, there is a time limit within which the test taker is required to answer all the items. Such a test evaluates the individual on the basis of time taken to answer the items accurately. In a speed test, all the items are of the same degree of difficulty. On the other hand, power test assesses the underlying ability or the power of the individuals by allowing them sufficient time. That is, these tests do not have any time limit. In a power test, the items are generally arranged in an increasing order of difficulty. So if a person for example is unable to solve the sixth item, he will have difficulty in answering the subsequent items. It is, however, difficult to construct a pure speed or power test. Majority of the tests are a combination of both the speed and the power test. While tests are often used in research and for making decisions about people, tests must be selected and used with great care. The test user or the decision maker should not rely on any single test. Test data should be combined with information about a person's background, interests, and past performance. This is all about the types of tests. We will now discuss about case study. So in this method of case study, the emphasis is given on in-depth study of a particular case. Researchers focus on cases which can provide critical information on new learning or less understood phenomena. The case can be an individual with distinguishing characteristics, for example, a patient showing psychological disorders or a patient showing psychological disorders, or a small group of individuals having some commonality among them, for example, creative writers like Rabindranath Tagore and Mahadevi Verma, institutions, for example, poorly or successfully functioning school, or a corporate office, and specific events, for example, children exposed to devastation by tsunami, war, or vehicular pollution, etc. The cases that we select for study are unique and therefore are rich in information. A case study employs multiple methods for collecting information such as interview, observation, and psychological tests from a variety of respondents who, in some way or the other, might be associated with the case and can provide useful information. With the help of case studies, psychologists have done research to understand feelings, fantasies, hopes, fears, traumatic experiences, parental upbringing, and so on, that helps to understand a person's mind and behavior. Case studies provide a narrative or detailed description of the events that take place in a person's life. A case study is a valuable research tool. in the field of clinical psychology and human development. Freud's insights that led to the development of psychoanalytic theory emerged from his observations and showed that meticulous records must be maintained on individual cases. Similarly, Piaget developed his theory of cognitive development on the basis of observation of his three children. Case studies have been conducted to understand the pattern of socialization of children. For example, Minton and Hitchcock conducted a case study of socialization of children among Rajputs of Khalapur. As Anandalakshmi studied aspects of childhood in a weaver's community in Varanasi. Case studies provide detailed, in depth depictions of people's lives. However, while generalizing on the basis of individual cases, one needs to be very cautious. The problem of validity in a single case study is quite challenging. It is recommended that the information should be collected using multiple strategies from different sources of information by a number of investigators. Careful planning of data collection is also very necessary. Throughout the process of data collection, the researcher is required to maintain a chain of evidence for linking various data sources having bearing on the research questions. So each method has its own limitations and advantages. Therefore, it is desirable that the researcher should not depend upon only one method. A combination of two or more methods should be used to get the real picture. If the methods converge, that is, they give the same results, one can certainly be more confident. Thank you.